How's it going, everybody? Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the first longer form video that I've done on this channel, and I'm going to be starting off with a big one. It is the 20 greatest boxers since 1930, in my opinion. Now, the reason I do it since 1930 is because I feel like it's a little harder to compare fighters of the really old era, kind of 1920s and before, your Benny Leonards, your Jack Dempseys, Harry Grebs, Sam Langfords, etc. So those guys will not be included in this list. But this list is going to be a rough idea of the 20 greatest fighters, in my opinion, since 1930. So it's something that always changes in my mind. I've done loads of these lists on Instagram, but I thought doing a longer form video, I can go into a bit more detail and kind of explain why I put these fighters in the list. So starting off firstly, I'm going to get straight into it. I'm going to do my first 19, and then before I get to number 1, I will do a few honourable mentions. Starting off, in number 20, we're going to go with Nicaragua's Alexis Arguello, a freeweight world champion, one of the greatest smaller fighters of all time. Just an absolute beast, a complete gentleman out of the ring, but an absolute killer in the ring. He mastered the basic fundamentals. You can see just incredible power in his long shots. Just such an enjoyable fighter to watch. Like I say, dominated 3 different weight divisions. Nearly moved up to welterweight to defeat the great Aaron Pryor in one of the greatest fights of the 80s, and Alexis Arguello was just a masterful fighter. You just have to look at that right hand he landed on Kevin Rooney to see that explosive power. So at number 20, I'm going to go with Alexis Arguello. Number 19. Now, this is slightly controversial. I'm going to take a little look at my list just because I've changed it all around. I'm going to go with Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Now, some of you might be looking at this video and thinking, why is Hearns so low? I think Hearns was incredible. Out of the fabulous 4, the famous 4, the 4 kings of boxing, I would say Hearns would be the worst one to fight. Tall, rangy, powerful, could work the body and the head. Just an absolute menace. And of course, absolutely destroyed Roberto Duran. An incredible fighter. Like I say, I don't know myself why I rate him so low in the context of this list. But at 19, I'm going to go with Tommy Hearns, just one of the all-time greats. And number 18, I'm going to go with Rocky Marciano. Now, another one you might think is too low on this list. Marciano is the only heavyweight champion in boxing history to retire undefeated. An incredibly high knockout ratio, just one of the all-time greats. Rocky's one of my favourite fighters. I mean, it just epitomises what we all have, that hard work, that desire to win, and just outwilling his opponents. He had some great wins, the wins against Ezard Charles, Archie Moore, and Jersey Joe Walcott, of course. However, his reign wasn't necessarily long. He was only champion for a short period of time. And the crazy thing about Marciano is he only boxed for a short period of time as well. I believe the first time he put on a pair of gloves to the time he retired was all within a span of roughly around 8 years. It's an incredible feat. So yeah, I'm going to go with number 18, Rocky Marciano. And now going to number 17, I'm going to go with Lennox Lewis, the undisputed heavyweight world champion. Beat everyone he ever fought. I would argue Lewis is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. He's definitely, probably, in my opinion, the greatest heavyweight of the 1990s. You just have to look at Lewis's resume, you know, wins against Tyson, Holyfield, Tommy Morrison, David Tua. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. Excellent fundamentals, extremely powerful. Vitaly Klitschko as well. Don't forget about the Vitaly Klitschko win. So, yeah, number 17, I'm going to go over Lennox Lewis. Moving on to number 16, another heavyweight. And now this man was just phenomenal in both reigns of his era as heavyweight, both eras of his reign as heavyweight champion, and we're going to go with Big George Foreman. Now, probably the most destructive fighter in his prime, when he destroyed Ken Norton and Joe Frazier before losing to the great Muhammad Ali. But Foreman retired pretty young. After losing to Jimmy Young, he retired, I believe he was 27 years old, and spent a decade out of the ring. He came back, and many people thought his comeback as what you would consider an old man was a joke, but Foreman proved everyone wrong, becoming the oldest heavyweight champion of all time, and that record still stands today. and that fight against Evander Holyfield, I mean, that's just an excellent fight. Foreman was probably in the top 2 most powerful heavyweights of all time. A phenomenal resume. Other than his fight against Muhammad Ali, an excellent chin. Always an exciting fight. The Ron Lyle fight is one of the greatest fights you can watch. So exciting. So at number 16, I'm going to go with Big George Foreman. Moving up to number 15, I'm going to go with the legendary middleweight champion, Argentina's Carlos Monzon. I mean, whew, that dude was a beast. I believe, off the top of my head, lost 3 of his first 21 fights. Monzon would go on to have 100 fights and would never lose again. He would rack up multiple draws, but he would reign as a very dominant middleweight champion for a very long time, scoring wins against the likes of Nino Benvenuti, Jose Napoles, just so many great fighters. Strong, athletic, had one of the best jabs in boxing, and just an absolute menace in the ring. Monzon was an absolute beast, so I'm going to go with Monzon. Going into the next slot, number 14, we're going to go with the legendary Mexican Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. 89-0. 89-0. Now, many people disregard that record, saying he fought loads of taxi drivers in that time, and, you know, he built his record up off nobody's, really, but 89-0. He fought so many good fighters in that reign as well. So many good fighters. And even afterwards, I mean, Chavez was just an absolute legend. A front-footed fighting machine. Just one of the most dominant fighters of his time. And in my opinion, one of my favourite fighters. The way he would chop down the body. The way he would be able to just break fighters down. His will to win. You look at the Meldrick Taylor fight. I mean, just clawing a win. Although it's controversial, just clawing a win from the jaws of defeat in the last seconds. Just an excellent fighter. And yeah, one thing people don't really give Chavez credit for either is the amount of title fights he had. He still holds the record for the most title fights, the most title defences. Absolute legend. Moving up, we're going to go to number 13, and I'm going to go with a prime Roy Jones Jr. Like, just unstoppable in his prime. You look at the James Toney performance, for instance. I mean, Roy Jones was an absolute phenomenon. So athletically skilled, so talented, so strong, powerful, fast. I mean, this guy had it all in his peak. The only reason I would put Jones probably not any higher is because his fall was quite dramatic after his incredible rise. But middleweight champion to super middleweight, light heavyweight, and when he beat Ruiz for the heavyweight title, had Jones retired there, I think you could be talking greatest of all time. But as I say, his decline was quite harsh. But Jones was a beast. Now we're going to the old timers. Number 12, we are going to go with the old mongoose, Archie Moore. Oh, the longest reigning light heavyweight champion in history. And what makes this so fascinating is that it was between his mid-30s to his mid-40s. Moore was an absolute phenomenon. Defensively, a defensive genius. He fought so many greats of his era. The only man to have fought Rocky Marciano as well as Muhammad Ali. And the undeniable stat that he has the most knockouts of any world champion in history. And no one's ever going to break that record. Fighters nowadays don't fight anywhere near as much as they used to. And I think the second world champion, and I'm saying world champion here with the most knockouts, is Sugar Ray Robinson. And he's about 20 knockouts off. Archie Moore was just incredible. A wonderful fighter. Also stepped in with the likes of Ezard Charles, Joey Maxim, Bobo Olsen. You know, these are Hall of Fame names that he has on his resume. And he's one of the greatest fighters of all time. Moving on, I'm going to go with my number 11. Now, again, this is one that I think might be controversial. People might suggest that this man should be higher. I'm going to go with Marvelous Marvin Hagler at number 11, the middleweight king. In my opinion, the greatest middleweight of all time. Drawing toe-to-toe with Carlos Monzon, but Hagler was just a menace. Mega disciplined. One of the worst people you could come against in the ring because he was just not going to take no for an answer. Only dropped once in his career, but in my opinion, it wasn't a knockdown. So he had a phenomenal chin, an excellent work rate. One of the most underrated technical boxers as well too. Hagler was a formidable switch hitter who could create just these crazy angles when he's pressuring his front-footed opponent, when he's pressuring his opponents on the front foot. But he could also outbox you on the back foot as well. A legendary resume. Wins over the likes of Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns. He'd snatched the title off Alan Minter. Yeah, Vito Antuofermo. And who can forget the fight with John the Beast Mugabe. Hagler is just one of the most enjoyable fighters to watch, and the entire package. Moving on to the top 10. At number 10, I'm going to go with Floyd Mayweather Jr. Now, Floyd, whether you like him or you hate him, Floyd was just an incredible boxer. He was the real deal. You had two Floyds. You had Pretty Boy Floyd, now Money Mayweather. Pretty Boy Floyd was a savage. He pulled off some of his greatest ever performances as Pretty Boy Floyd when he absolutely dismantled Diego Corrales, who at the time was an undefeated, murderous puncher. When he scored Gatti as well, I would say Gatti was a little bit shocked by then, but still an incredible performance. But, you know, the consistency that Floyd had, his defensive genius, in my opinion, the greatest defensive fighter of all time. It's just, yeah, you can't deny this man's greatness in the ring. You could have an argument that perhaps he didn't fight as many of his opponents in their absolute peak, but I mean, the level of consistency the level of talent he was fighting consistently is just on another level. When people seem to work him out, which very, very rarely happened, you could argue maybe Maidana and Jose Luis Castillo in the first fight, when they seemed to work him out, he adapted and won the rematch, which is a true sign of someone's greatness. So at number 10, I'm going with Floyd Mayweather Jr. Number 9, we are going with the other great of his era, Manny Pacquiao. Boxing's only 8-weight division champion. Pacquiao's career is staggering. The statistics are literally mind-blowing. From a world champion from flyweight all the way up to super middleweight, and he also skipped a few weight divisions in between as well. His career before he even stepped up to the mega fights is a Hall of Famer career. Wins over Marquez, Morales, Barrera. And then, of course, in his peak, he was absolutely destroying people. Wins against Cotto, Hatton, Margarito, De La Hoya, who you could also argue was past his peak. But nevertheless, Pacquiao is just phenomenal. And in so many exciting fights as well. And the thing with Manny as well is, you know, with Floyd, for instance, you see why he had that longevity. He didn't take much damage. But Pacquiao was in wars, and he's still the only fighter in history to be a world champion across 4 different decades. The longevity with his style is just mind-blowing and just one of the all-time greats. So at number 9, we're going for Manny Pacquiao. At number 8, going back to the 1950s, we're going to go with Ezzard Charles. In my opinion, the greatest light heavyweight of all time. Absolutely. The display he put on against the incredibly avoided Charlie Burley is just phenomenal. To win the heavyweight title as well against the likes of Jersey Joe Walcott. I mean, Ezzard Charles was just boxing perfection. Tall, powerful, rangy, just an absolute genius in the ring. Watch his highlight reel. He was just phenomenal. Also stepped in with Rocky Marciano, gave Marciano problems. Charles was just phenomenal. Yeah, and there's so many Hall of Famers on his resume. Yeah, so at number 8, I'm going to go with Ezzard Charles. Moving on to number 7. Now we're getting to the top spot now. Number 7, I'm going to go with Sugar Ray Leonard. In my opinion, probably the best fighter alive today. I would say the best fighter alive. So of all the old greats that have passed on, now I would say you would probably say Sugar Ray Leonard is the greatest fighter. Spiteful with his combinations. He was the whole deal. Marketable, good-looking guy that could just move around the ring, but also destroy his opponents. An Olympic gold medalist. Hand speed like nothing else. The ability to throw combinations. The ability to dig deep in the trenches. Oh, man. Sugar Ray Leonard had it all. His KO against Davey Boy Green is one of the most spiteful KOs you ever see. And then he moves up and takes on a prime Roberto Duran. Boxers against the game plan, probably not the best thing to do, but to go 15 rounds with Duran at that intense pace is a sign of the man's greatness. Goes into the rematch and absolutely dismantles Duran. Just performs one of the biggest masterclasses you'll ever see. Wins against the likes of Tommy Hearns. Whether you like it or not, he ultimately holds the win against Marvin Hagler. Moved up and beat Donnie Lalonde. Leonard is an absolute legend. And that's why he is number 7 on my list. Moving up to number 6, we're going to go to the longest reigning heavyweight champion in boxing history. And we're going to go with the Brown Bomber, Joe Louis. Joe Louis is like reading a boxing textbook. This guy does everything perfectly. His balance, the way he was able to shuffle around the ring, his ability to finish off her opponents. Every punch is technically perfect. A formidable puncher. Just an all-time great fighter. My second greatest heavyweight of all time. In his prime, he only took 1 loss, and that was a KO to the great German Max Schmeling. But a testament to Louis's greatness was coming back and absolutely dismantling Schmeling in 1 round. In probably the biggest fight in boxing history, with everything going on around the time. Just on the brink of the Second World War, a German fighter against an American fighter. The Germans using Schmeling as a propaganda machine. Louis basically had to win this fight for the good guys, is what the American president said before the fight. So imagine having that pressure, coming off your only loss, going in and just destroying the only guy to beat you in 1 round. Louis was just phenomenal. I love watching Joe Louis fights. And yeah, I would recommend everyone to watch his highlight reel. Just destroyed fighters. Literally would hit you and make you do a 360 in the ring. So yeah. No, moving on to number 5. My favourite fighter, along with Triple G. You can see the hat there, repping the Triple G hat. At number 5, I'm going to go with Roberto Duran. Now, people don't give Duran enough credit for his reign at lightweight. I mean, the boxing experts do. That's why he's rated so highly. But Duran literally terrorised the lightweight scene. And you could argue he may have been the greatest fighter of the 1970s, alongside, obviously, Muhammad Ali. Racked his record up to 71-1 when he took on the great Sugar Ray Leonard after dominating the lightweight scene for nearly a decade. Then beat Leonard in one of the all-time great fights to go to 72-1. Duran was an absolute animal. And of course, he had his setbacks in his careers. You know, he lost to the likes of Leonard, was absolutely destroyed by Tommy Hearns, was shocked by Kirkland Lang. But it was just how he was always able to come back. You know, after kind of being on the brink of his career kind of, you know, being over, he took on the very dangerous Pepino Cuevas and destroyed him. Put on masterclasses against Carlos Palomino. And once again, at one of his downtimes in his career, took on the young Davey Moore and absolutely destroyed Moore to become a freeweight world champion. Went 15 rounds with a prime Marvin Hagler, the only person to do that in Hagler's successful title reign, and then moved up and put on his greatest performance, in my opinion, against Iron the Blade Barkley, a fighter who was menacing for middleweights, let alone a lightweight in Duran. And Duran just, yeah, an incredibly artistic fighter up close. He could box you on the back foot. Watching Duran is like calculated aggression, just wild calculated aggression. Everything he's doing looks crazy, but it's all calculated. He's using his shoulders to make shots miss. He's messing around with his opponent's gloves to work inside. Just an absolute legend. Moving on to number 4, I'm going to go with Willie Pep. Now, the ultimate, well, the original defensive genius. Willie Pep went 62-0 off the top of my head before losing his first fight to Sammy Angot, I believe. He then went on another win streak, I believe, of 70 fights. I may be wrong off the top of my head. But the most astounding thing about this second win streak is that halfway through, he was in a deadly plane crash and spent, I believe, 6 months in a full body cast, being told he would never box again. So he's got a record of something like 140-1. He's the dominant featherweight champion. and he's survived this plane crash. He would go on to box almost 100 more times. He was just beautiful to watch. Some of the greatest footwork you'll ever see. Almost impossible to hit. Willie Pep was so great. He won a punch with, he won a round without even throwing a punch. Defeated the legendary puncher Sandy Sadler. Pep was just phenomenal. Moving on to number 3, we are going to go with the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali. Just the most iconic boxer in history. Firstly, I mean, Ali's impact outside of the sport was just phenomenal. What he did politically, what he stood for, was just, you know, he created a movement. But his career, in my opinion, is sometimes overlooked. Now, of course, you have the legendary wins, the Thriller in Manila against Joe Frazier, the Rumble in the Jungle against George Foreman, the 2 wins against Sonny Liston, the famous Phantom Punch. Now, those are all-time legendary wins. But Ali's resume was stacked in probably the most stacked era in the heavyweight division in the 1970s. He had wins against the likes of Ron Lyle, Ernie Shavers. You know, Ali was stepping in with Floyd Patterson, Archie Moore. Although Archie Moore was old, Ali just has so many legendary names on his resume. Completely changed the way heavyweights boxed. Well, he didn't change the way because no one could mimic him, but no one had ever seen anyone box like a young Muhammad Ali. He defied all of the laws that you teach a boxer, but he got away with it because he was just that good. Impossible to hit, one of the greatest jabs of all time, so fast. And then you looked at his toughness in the second reign of his career after the ban, the 3-year ban. One of the greatest chins of all time, was involved in some of the most brutal fights in history. Muhammad Ali is just, without a doubt, the greatest heavyweight of all time. Now, going on to number 2, we're going to go with the legendary Henry Armstrong, boxing's only simultaneous freeweight world champion. Now, let me explain Armstrong's greatness to you, because being a freeweight world champion now doesn't seem like testament to being the greatest fighter of all time. When Armstrong was a freeweight world champion, there were only 8 weight divisions in the sport. So he was a world champion from featherweight, lightweight to welterweight. But not only was he a freeweight world champion, he had won and held all of these belts at the same time and moved up and down across those 3 drastically different weight divisions defending the titles. So he basically had almost half of the weight division, half of the world titles in the sport, and was defending all of them at the same time. Not only this, he moved up to middleweight to take on Ceferino Garcia and was blatantly robbed of becoming a 4-weight world champion. Armstrong was just phenomenal, never took a backward step, smaller than most of his opposition, but yet they could not get him off. Some of his attacking defensive moves are way ahead of his time. Over 100 knockouts in his career, just the stuff of legends. And even to this day, he still holds the record for the most welterweight title defences, which I believe is 20 off the top of my head, whilst holding the featherweight and the lightweight titles and also defending them too. Just hammering Hank, Homicide Hank, whatever you want to call him, an absolute legend who I would definitely recommend everyone to watch. And if you're an aggressive fighter, study this man. Now, before I go on to my number 1, I'm going to give you some honourable mentions that didn't make my list, but I felt like they needed to be on the list. So I'm going to go with Brazilian legend Ada Joffrey, the defensive genius James Toney, the legendary welterweight Emil Griffith. I'm also going to go with Salvador Sanchez, who, you know, the fact that he's even amongst these names after dying at 23 is a testament to the guy's legacy, his greatness. The legendary Larry Holmes. I'm also going to go with the fearsome puncher Sandy Sadler. And Bernard Hopkins too. Bernard Hopkins, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated fighters of all time. The oldest world champion in boxing history. And my last honourable mention is going to go to Smoking Joe Frazier. But now, for our number 1 spot, you might have already guessed it, Sugar Ray Robinson. Now, this guy is the greatest fighter of all time. It's just, his career is just phenomenal. Talk about being way ahead of his time. He has inspired so many of the greats below him. Robinson could move like no one of his time, but he could also punch. Over 100 knockouts in his career in over 200 fights. Robinson went 40-0 before losing to Jake LaMotta, and would then go on a 91 fight unbeaten streak where he would rule the welterweight division as well as the middleweight division. Just the most phenomenal fighter you will ever see. He could move his feet beautifully, he could dance around the ring, he could knock you out with one punch, combinations, he could control you up close or at range. Robinson was phenomenal, and he beat so many greats of his era. And just separate eras too. I believe off the top of my head, he's had wins against 18 different Hall of Famers, but multiple wins. You have to bear in mind, he would have beaten the likes of Jake LaMotta, I think 4 times off the top of my head. He beat Carmen Basilio, Gene Fullmer, Henry Armstrong. I mean, the list just goes on. And when he did this, when he did kind of drop off in his mid-30s and he did start losing to some of the great middleweights of his time, he would always win in the rematch. A multiple-time middleweight champion, welterweight champion. He would even move up to light heavyweight and would attempt to win the light heavyweight title. And would, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. And would pass out through heat exhaustion in the 13th or 14th round whilst he was up on the cards. Robinson is the greatest fighter of all time, and in my opinion, there's just no denying it. Most of his losses came in the latter stages of his career, and in his prime, he was just untouchable. So, guys, they are my top 20 boxers of the last, well, since 1930. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's a bit different to doing the TikTok and the Instagram videos because it is a lot longer. If you did like the video, make sure you like it and subscribe to the page. I really appreciate all the support, and let me know in the comment sections what kind of videos you want to see. Thank you very much.